Kevin Powell is one of the most acclaimed political, cultural, literary, and hip-hop voices in America today. I know you told me that. But he does his work out of New York. His hometown, his adoptive hometown is Brooklyn, and he has been in most of the struggles that we've seen for freedom and justice for the last 30 years, 25, 30 years. He's president and co-founder of an organization called BK Nation, which is a new national organization. It's progressive and multicultural and focused on matters like education, civic engagement, and leadership training, health and wellness, social media, arts and culture, and jobs and small business creation. He was a Democratic candidate for Congress in Brooklyn in 2008 and 2010, and he is the author of 11 books. And some of them will be on sale in the back. So after you hear from him, if you want to get a copy of one of his books, Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, and the Ghost of Dr. King, I think is the one that we have, right? His newest book. He'll be here to sign those books if you'd like to purchase a copy. And he does tremendous work on our behalf. One of the things I'm learning from his work is also how to balance our lives as activists, as people who are committed to the world, with our own self-care, right? So one of the things that we see sometimes is people burning themselves out. And so we want you all to do the work. We all want to engage in the beautiful struggle of bringing justice into the world, and we want to preserve our own lives in the process and be restored by that work rather than depleted by it. And so I'm thankful for the work that he's been doing, and I'm really thankful for his topic tonight, which is deepening diversity. So really making diversity mean something. We hear that word and it doesn't always have meaning, right? Deepening diversity, living in a multicultural America. Welcome, Kevin Powell.
What's up? What's up? I'm real thankful for this opportunity. When the sister was speaking with the baby, your name is Kiana? She talked about Ras Baraka, who's Mayor Ras Baraka of Newark, New Jersey. I've been close to the Baraka family for 25, 26 years. That's my people. And we consider Newark, New Jersey, because of his victory, a liberated zone. Yes, that's right. And in 2015, we're actually hosting a national conference on leadership, ideas, and action in Newark, New Jersey. My organization, BK Nation, and BK stands for Building Knowledge. All of y'all invited. Everyone's invited. Anyone who's serious about being an organizer. I ain't giving out plane tickets, but y'all invited. Hey, I got to California, you know what I'm saying? But I just want to say thank you to her and the other organizers who spoke, because I actually do think this is an important part of the program. I'm an organizer. The books are cool, everything else is cool, but I'm about organizing and bringing people together. This is the most important thing for me at this stage, because we gotta change this world, y'all. This is not a joke. I want to thank God for this opportunity. I happen to have a faith, but if you're any faith or no faith at all, that's your right. All I ask is we at least have some sort of spiritual or moral compass that guides us, because I think we need to have some basic values out here in 2014, you know what I'm saying? I don't know about y'all, but where I come from, Brooklyn, New York, the violence is out of control. It's just out of control. The police violence against our communities, the violence that we've internalized against each other is out of control. So it says to me, a lot of us don't believe in anything. You know what I mean? So I just want to say that. I want to thank Dr. Abdullah, all the folks who made this possible, this department. And I didn't realize it's the second oldest in the country. This is so historic. And I just, there's so much I want to say. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to keep it 100 here. I've had a really effed up last couple of days. And I think Dr. Abdullah could tell by my energy and my attitude. It's been rough. And some of the problems that I've had the last couple of days have been with people who call themselves progressives or revolutionary or militant or radical. You know, which is why I'm also very adamant, not just about talking and organizing, but also doing the work on yourselves. But when I came in here and I saw the energy in this room and saw the beautiful people in this room, I just want to say thank y'all, because you actually just lifted my spirits up just being here. So give yourselves a round of applause. You know what I'm saying? Because anyone who does this work knows that this is tremendously difficult work. It's lonely work. It's thankless work. And most of us who do this work, we don't get paid anything close to what we should be getting paid. We do it because we care and because we really believe that all people are equal and there should be justice and freedom and opportunity for all people on this planet. Am I right, y'all? Right. Everyone should have an opportunity to have an opportunity, as I say. I'm happy to talk about this topic, deepening diversity, because there's so much that could be said about it. And, you know, it bothers me. I got to acknowledge Rosa Clemente, my sister, Boricua, New York. We go back, and I got to say this publicly. I'm glad she's here. Rosa, we should do something called Hip Hop Speaks in New York. What, almost 15 years ago, Rosa? It's been a minute. You know what I mean? Rosa was the only speaker who would get up at the end after all of us just went and did all our fancy speeches and pontificated. She's like, here we are. What's the solutions? And I've been quoting Rosa all over the country for the last 15 years. Like, it's cool to give a speech, but what are you going to do? Right. You know what I mean? So I just got to acknowledge her. We miss her in New York, but y'all got her in California. And y'all got the...
We have her in Pan-African Studies.
That's right. And Rosa's smart because I'm hearing that it's snowing in New York tonight, so you're in the right place. You know what I mean? But I gotta shout out Rosa because she's one of, I don't know if y'all realize, she's one of our most dynamic leaders in the country. And so proud of her and what she's accomplished, not just as an activist, but as a scholar. As a scholar. So thank you for who you are, Rosa. I appreciate you. So this topic, deepening diversity, living in a multicultural America. I want to suggest to everyone here, no matter what your background, I don't care if you're Italian, Jewish, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Vietnamese, wherever you're from, black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, you all need to think about what did I learn about myself? Who am I? Where did I come from? I'm clear that I'm an African. I'm real clear that I'm an African. I'm very clear that I'm an African. But I didn't always know that. I didn't always know that. I come from people who grew up in the Jim Crow South. My whole family is from South Carolina. My mother and her 3 sisters and brother and father and mother were so poor, they lived in a 2-room shack in the low country of South Carolina, right across from the Savannah River in Georgia. They were so poor, sometimes the only food they would have would be pouring some syrup into a bowl and they would pass it along, and that was their meal for the day. Are y'all with me out there? You know what I mean? They were so poor that the girls took turns going to school because there might have been one outfit, one female outfit, one girl outfit for that particular time of year. They were so poor that my mother at the age of 8 had to start working, picking cotton. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. If your families are immigrants, if they came from the South to places like California, New York, or Chicago, y'all know what I'm talking about. My mother would tell me stories about the racism that they experienced, how our white sisters and brothers would call them every name except for their names. You know, how my grandfather, whose name was Pearlie, was called Uncle Pearlie, how my grandmother was called Aunt Lottie, which is why I will never buy Uncle Ben's rice or Aunt Jemima pancake mix ever again. Y'all feel me? You know, when we talk about diversity, we also have to talk about the fact that racism is so embedded in us, even things that we take for granted, like the food that we eat, that becomes a part of popular culture, perpetuates the superiority of one group of people and the inferiority of another group of people. Y'all with me out there? So my mother did what a lot of people did because they were so poor. She fled. I got to get the hell out of here. And so she moved up north to Jersey City, where I was born and raised, Jersey City, New Jersey. I've been in New York and Brooklyn mostly for my entire adult life, but I was born and raised in Jersey City. And she met my father in Jersey City. My mother fell in love with my father. My father fell in lust with my mother. Ladies, y'all know what I'm talking about? It is real like that. You know, and I hope the men here, you know, Dr. Abdullah mentioned patriarchy, sexism, misogyny. I just found my father for the first time in nearly 40 years this past November in South Carolina. And I found out that he had children born in the 50s, the 60s, which is me, the 70s, and the 80s. We got to know who we are, though, because how are you going to talk about diversity if you don't know where you come from? You know? My mother was forced to go to the hospital by herself because my father wasn't there. She got in a cab and just went and had me. She had an 8th grade education, as I said, so that meant she had to raise me on welfare, food stamps, government cheese, and the kind of poverty I wouldn't wish on anyone. When we talk about deepening diversity, it also means having a level of empathy for people. My mother is a woman of color. She had to deal with racism. She's a woman. She has to deal with sexism. And then she's a poor woman. She had to deal with classism. Right. Are y'all with me out there? Yes. And so this is the kind of stuff, when we hear people talking about diversity, and I hear the kind of struggles that y'all going through on this campus, there's nothing wrong with being privileged if it's tied to a sense of humanity. But if your privilege allows you not to see the struggles of other people, not to be able to empathize with other people, you're not human to me. My mother had to struggle by herself. And I know, and Dr. Abdullah and I were talking about what it is like to be a single mother. Any single mothers out there? Y'all know what I'm talking about. It's no joke. And my mother, because she was born in the 1940s, she experienced racism, segregation, Jim Crowism. She caught the spirit of the civil rights movement, or the Black Power movement, or the Black Liberation movement. And one of the things that was a big push was education could be a door to open up for us to have better lives. Now, my mother was not in the movement. My mother's not a movement person. One of the big mythologies that everybody was just marching in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. No, most of us were just struggling and surviving. So my mother, but she did catch the desire to have an educational opportunity for her son because she didn't have an opportunity. So she made sure I went to the best public schools in Jersey City. Well, we're talking about deepening diversity. I learned many years later, when you go to school to learn how to read and write and do arithmetic, that's one thing. But from the moment you go to school, they're teaching you that Columbus discovered America. And we know that Columbus was a terrorist who committed genocide against indigenous people. Let's call it what it is. You know, from the moment that you have thoughts, you're being miseducated around what diversity is. And I didn't know that. So I internalized this stuff. Columbus discovered America. Y'all know the songs we used to sing about it. You know, I remember when I was in grade school, I played a man named Thomas Jefferson in the 4th grade. Yeah, I did. I had a white wig and everything. And, you know, they told us all this stuff about how great Jefferson was, but I didn't learn anything about a black man who was his contemporary named Benjamin Banneker, who created the grid for Washington, D.C. And I certainly didn't learn that Washington and Jefferson were slave masters who didn't even have the decency, as they were having relationships with their slave women, to release those folks when they died. Are y'all with me out there? I didn't learn that. And if I didn't learn anything about black history, you better believe I didn't learn anything about Latino history, Chicano history, Asian history, Native American history. Women, I learned nothing about y'all growing up except that Betsy Ross stole the flag. You know, Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat. You might have heard vaguely about Helen Keller. Are y'all following me out here? We're talking about diversity, but how can you talk about deepening diversity if your own education, whether you went to public schools or private schools, because some of us paid to be miseducated. That's right. Some of us paid to be miseducated. And then we get to be professors and decision makers in the Cal State system telling people what ethnic studies is and it is not. Right. Think about that for a second. Who cares if you got a PhD if you're ignorant? There's nothing wrong with being ignorant. That just means you don't know something. But if you're enthusiastically ignorant, and I'm going to fight ethnic studies requirements because that's challenging my privilege in the way that I want education to be presented in this country. I mean, look at the diversity in this room. I want to learn about everyone in this room equally, because if we agree that we're all equals, then our education should be presenting us as equals. Not white brothers and sisters did everything, and the rest of us were just a part of the supporting cast, or what we like to call the help. Right. This is my education growing up. I was an A student. My mother didn't tolerate bad grades. I couldn't miss school, none of that. But part of my education also, because I'm in the first wave of kids going to integrated schools in the 70s, was that we had some hateful white sisters and brothers. And let me be clear, I had friends of all backgrounds. As I've said to Rosa many times, I have a very deep love for the Latino community, especially Puerto Ricans, because that's who I grew up with in Jersey City. That's why I speak Spanish. That's why I love the culture, the history. But I also had friends who were Italian, who were Jewish, who were Irish, who were Polish, all different types of people. I'm in the 4th grade. I didn't realize we were integrating a school, us black and Latino kids, a group in Jersey City called the Bones, young white men. The Bones stood for beat on niggas every second. Yeah, it did. I want y'all to think about that for a second. Beat on niggas every second, and guess what they did? We're little kids in the 4th grade. How old are you in the 4th grade? 9 or 10 years old. We go into school, and we hear the Bones are coming, the Bones are coming. We're like, what's the Bones, son? You know what I mean? Well, the Bones showed up with bricks, with rocks, with bottles, and they threw them at us because they didn't want us going to school with white kids. Diversity. Y'all feel me? Mm-hmm. That was my first direct experience with racism. A few years later, my mother and my Aunt Kathy, the two women who basically raised me and my cousin Anthony, my Aunt Kathy's son, we were poor, y'all, like I said. And we were so poor, I didn't even know what a color television was. You know, we were so poor, my mother and I shared a bedroom a bed in the back room, and my Aunt Kathy and her son shared a bed in the front room. There was no separate apartments. We didn't have a telephone. We used to go outside to the drugstore to make phone calls. But back in the day, you know, there was no cell phones, none of that stuff. But at some point, they got a little bit of money. We got our own apartments, and they decided we're going to move out of the hood into a white area. Well, in that white area, talking about deepening diversity, I do what most boys do. I went outside to play. Let's play ball. There was a young white brother with red hair. I'll never forget him. His name was Harpo because he looked like Harpo Marx, like the Marx brothers. You know, he kept saying, hey, Joey, you and me on one team, and Donnie, you and the nigga on the other team. And I'm like, well, who's the nigga? Who's he talking about? And I know this might sound ignorant, but up until this point, I'm 12 years old now, I'm not thinking of myself as anything other than I'm Kevin, Shirley Mae's son. You know what I mean? I'm trying to get to college. I'm trying to have a life. But it hurt me so much that he kept saying it, I did what any normal brother from the hood would do. I picked up the stick and I chased him with it. And I remember running up to he ran into his mother's house. His mother opened the door, let him in, and said, oh, he didn't mean anything by it. Okay. And so some of our parents, including some of us in this room, don't even care about challenging oppression. We perpetuate it. A couple years later, my voice changes. I start to grow some facial hair. I'm 15 years old now. I get into a fight with a brother named Richie Rodriguez on a school bus. Boys fight. That's what we do. Richie happened to be a lighter complexion Latino brother. I'm black, very clearly. The police got on, 2 white officers. They carefully escorted Richie off the bus, but then I got handcuffed and thrown off the bus. Richie's in the front seat, not handcuffed, chilling with the police officer. I'm in the back seat, my hands are behind my back, and the white officer, I'll never forget him, Officer Quinn, red hair, red mustache, yells at me, calls me all kinds of names, so I yell back, you know, probably foolishly, F you. Officer Quinn balled his fist, and he smashed me in my face and bloodied my face and my entire front part of my body. Now, you can see me now. I'm 5'10", 5'11". I may weigh a buck 160. At 15 years old, I'm lucky if I weighed 90 pounds. I get to the precinct. Richie's let go. I'm handcuffed to a holding cell. My mother finally comes down because they call her, and she sees me. Her son is bloodied. I didn't even know at the time that I was the victim of police brutality or racial profiling. Right. Do y'all feel I'm going with this? What I knew was I had been smashed in the face, and this officer got away with it. And I remember later on, someone from some organization I had never heard of called the NAACP called and asked if I wanted to do anything about it. And I was like, nah, I don't want to have nothing to do with this ever again. Y'all feel me? A couple years later, I go to college. I go to college only because of financial aid. I go to college only because of the civil rights movement. In New Jersey, where I'm from, or New York, where Rose is from, we had something called the Educational Opportunity Fund or program, which made it possible for people who have been the victims of white supremacy, institutionalized racism for generations and generations to finally go to college. Isn't it tragic that so many of us can say we're the first in our family to go to college? Or if you're poor, no matter what your race, isn't it tragic for you to say you're the first in your family? It's beautiful, but it's also like, well, what happened to the rest of us? You know what I'm saying? I get to Rutgers University. My introduction at Rutgers University, I was with a Trinidadian brother from the West Indies. We're waiting for a campus bus, and we just think we're fitting in. We got our backpack on, we got our socks on, and our penny loafers like we used to wear back in the day. The bus stop is packed. Police car, campus safety rolls up, and they stop, and they say, yeah, can we see your IDs? We're like, who are they talking to? We're looking around like, who ain't got their ID? They were talking to us. Here we are, college students now, being racially profiled on a campus. I know y'all know what I'm talking about, right? We were like, no, we're not showing you our IDs. Why aren't you asking the other students for their IDs? Well, guess what the police officer did? He called for backup, and 5 other campus police cars showed up, and we were forced to give up our IDs and prove that we were students at Rutgers University. I also happened to go to school, start school during the era of Ronald Reagan. Anybody remember Ronald Reagan? He's from your state here, this great state of California. You know, as y'all were talking about the Brown Berets and the Black Panther Party, you know how Reagan, when he was governor, how he treated anyone who was fighting the system. You know, criminalizing people who were actually trying to change the way things were. Well, I'm in college during the Reagan era. I'm in college when something called the anti-apartheid movement began in this country on college campuses from UCLA out here all the way out to New York City, to Columbia University, to Rutgers, where I went to school. And it changed my life. Now, why is this important to say? I did not know that there was any such thing as a Department of Pan-African Studies. Rutgers had an Africana Studies department. I didn't know that we came from Africa. I knew nothing. And I graduated third in my high school class. When I graduated, I won a math award. I won an English award. Y'all feel me? But to me, a real education has to be rooted in who you are. If you have no knowledge of yourself, no matter who you are, to me, it doesn't matter what skill sets you have, what kind of money you make in your life, because you're perpetuating your own self-hatred. Are y'all with me out there? You know, you will grow up the way I grew up, believing that someone has good hair and someone has bad hair. And I'm here to tell you, no matter what your hair is, it's good hair if you got some hair. Am I right, y'all? You grew up believing that lighter is better than dark skin. And we know, am I right, chocolate brothers and sisters, we're all beautiful, right? You know, no matter what your body type is, it's beautiful. Your nose size, your lips is all beautiful. But I grew up believing all of this was ugly and unattractive. So I get to this college, and not because I went to Rutgers University, because I'm not going to give the university that kind of credit, because they fought us tooth and nail, just like they're fighting y'all here, to maintain the status quo, to maintain their privilege, to maintain their power. But it's because of the students that I encountered at Rutgers University, because of the anti-apartheid movement, and because I discovered a certain section of the library called the E185 section of the library. That's where all the black books are. And I began to read. I began to absorb everything I could on who I was. And my mind was blown. Particularly, one of the first books I read, The Autobiography of Malcolm X, my hero. You feel me? I didn't know a black man like that even existed or could exist. You know what I mean? And as he was talking about how they were so hungry, his family, they would eat the whole lot of a donut, I related to that. You know? I related to when his family was destroyed by the power structure during the Great Depression, split off, sent into foster care. I related to when he ended up on the streets. You know what I mean? Yeah, in high school, I loved Shakespeare. I loved Charles Dickens, you know? Those are some of the people who made me want to be a writer. But it's a whole nother thing when you start to read writers who look like you. You see yourself in history all of a sudden. You know what I mean? I don't have to go around pretending that I'm Hamlet anymore, to be or not to be. Hell, I could be Malcolm X because he was real, son. You know what I mean? Right? I was with Malcolm when he was in jail for 7 years, yo. When he said, I only had an 8th grade education, he went as far as my mother went. And he said, I could barely read my own handwriting. I was there with him when he started reading the dictionary. And I'm saying to myself, if this man in prison could read a dictionary, then as a college student, I have a responsibility to read everything I get my hands on for the rest of my life. Are y'all with me out there? And I saw the power of not an education, but self-education. Because education means someone else is giving it to you, but self-education means I'm going to take these tool sets and understand this is a tool for liberation. Are y'all with me? And when I finished that book, I cried. I cried, and I cried, and I cried, because he was murdered. Right. But they only murdered him physically because Malcolm is still here. You know what I'm saying? But I cried because I was like, man, as someone who grew up without a father, who had a father craving my entire youth. That's why I was bad in school. I mean, if I was a teenager now, they would say I had ADD and ADHD and everything else. You know what I'm saying? Nah, I was in pain, son. You know what I mean? Like most of our youth, in pain, hurt. You know what I mean? And you're going to be angry if you're hurt. Am I right, y'all? And I was blown away by his life. And I decided right there at 18 years old, this is it for me. I'm an organizer. I'm going to write, but my writing is going to be about my community. And I'm going to tell the truth about all the stuff that has been manipulated, stolen, purposely lost, or lied about. Because I'm clear that I'm an African. I'm clear that I'm an African. And I read voraciously. You know, we would pass books along. One of the books I came across was a brother who spent his entire adult life in prison here in California. His name was George Jackson. Soledad brother. You know what I mean? I mean, hell, that book was better than Malcolm's autobiography. George was on a whole nother level. You know what I mean? And when the sister mentioned Mary Baraka, yeah, we started reading about the Harlem Renaissance, the Black arts movement of the 1960s, the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s. We studied the New Rican poets, the Puerto Rican poets in New York City with names like Pedro Pietre. You know what I mean? We were serious about learning our culture and our history and sharing it with each other. And I'll be honest with y'all, during those years in college and even beyond, I was very angry. And I was so angry that I stopped drinking white milk. I stopped eating white bread. Yeah, I did. And I'm still angry. Hell with that. But I had to learn the difference between proactive anger and reactionary anger. And if you've been miseducated the first 18, 19, 20 years of your life, and all of a sudden you have this revelation, you're going to be angry. You're going to be real angry. You know? Like, why wasn't this taught to me? Because the point of college, in my opinion, should be to give you the tools so that you can live a full life. But unfortunately, what we have to deal with in the American collegiate system is fight for those tools. Fight for that education. Demand that education. 2 of the 4 years I was in college, we took over buildings. We were not playing. You know what I mean? And I'm not encouraging y'all, well, I am encouraging y'all to do something like that. Do what you got to do. You know what I'm saying? But we had to make a point, which is, you know what? You don't get anything if you don't fight for it. And some of us got to have a backbone out here. You know, we got to have some courage out here. And understand that we stand on the shoulders of people who came before us, and we don't have the courage to speak up and to, as the brother said, organize. We should never apologize for announcing a rally or a march. You know, the verdict is, I mean, the grand jury decision is supposed to be coming down on Monday. That's the latest I heard about the Michael Brown thing in Ferguson. Everyone should be out there, what the sister just said. You know what I mean? Because I'm thinking to myself, Michael Brown is me when I was 15 years old and punched in my face by that police officer in Jersey City. What's the difference? I could have been dead. You know what I mean? So these were my college years. After college, I land in New York City. I get involved in the literary community. You know, a lot of Black and Latino writers coming together, names like Willie Perdomo, Tony Medina, Ras Baraka, a lot of us, Asha Bendeli. And we saw our art as our weapon. Any artists out there, any creative people out there, anyone who writes, draws, paints, dances, word, you know what I'm saying? Because we said, wait a minute, you know what, the artists, as people are organizing, you who create art, you've got to articulate, visualize, give us the image of what we're doing. What was going on during those days, late 80s, early 1990s? I'm a hip-hop head for life, y'all. You know what I mean? I grew up as a b-boy. My nickname is Kipo because that was my tag as a graffiti writer. You know what I mean? And I'm going to tell y'all, our culture, hip-hop, it didn't matter if it was Public Enemy or NWA right out of California, straight out of Compton. Because F the Police to this day is still the most important anti-police brutality, racial profiling song ever made, in my humble opinion. That's right. You know what I mean? And we understood this is like yin and yang. They both saying the same thing. The music articulated what we were feeling, and honestly, the music was actually helping to educate us in a way that Cal State, LA, and Rutgers University and all these other fancy schools were not doing. We knew that we could turn to a hip-hop track and get some tidbit about history. Are y'all with me out there? You know what I mean? I was introduced to jazz via John Coltrane because of Chuck D referencing Coltrane. When Chuck D said supporter of Chesimard, a.k.a. Assata Shakur, that made you look up, well, who's this Assata Shakur? Y'all with me? This was important. But an interesting thing happened since we're talking about deepening diversity. Hip-hop was actually deepening diversity. Just how the creation of Black studies and Chicano studies and Latino studies and Asian studies were doing in the 60s and 70s. How were they doing it? This culture that was created by Black American, Latino, and Black folks. Don't ever say hip-hop was created only by Black folks. African American, Latino, West Indian people created hip hop. So even the culture came from diverse people. Are y'all with me out there? Yes, yes. But by the time this thing started to grow in the late 80s, early 1990s, how did it deepen diversity? All of a sudden you had white sisters and brothers and Asian sisters and brothers saying, hip hop is my thing too. In fact, Chuck D said to me one time, this culture belongs to all young people. You know? It strikes me, me and Ms. Abdul were just talking about Tupac Shakur, who I'm writing a biography about that'll be out in a couple of years. I can't tell you how many young white brothers I've met all over the world, white brothers, who love and worship Tupac. I don't think he could even imagine that. You know what I mean? Because if you're giving true education, it's honest, it's real, and people gravitate towards that. And so when we talk about deepening diversity, it's not about hating anybody. Y'all with me out there? You know, you'll never hear it come out of my mouth, I hate anybody, but what I do hate is ignorance and oppression and privilege that has run amok. Are y'all with me? Right. This is what hip-hop was doing until it got co-opted and corrupted by the industry. There's hip-hop culture. Can y'all say culture? Culture. Then there's hip-hop the industry. Two totally different things. And if you're a true hip-hop head, you know the difference. The culture, y'all know, is the MC, the DJ, the dance element, graffiti, and the fifth element is knowledge, right? The industry said, aha, we're not going to allow you to deepen diversity here. We're going to go back in our history of oppression and redirecting, and we're going to take this thing called the minstrel show, we're going to remix it for the modern times. And those minstrel shows depicted us as over-sexualized, immoral, violent, and dangerous. There was no balance. Are y'all with me for a second? And if y'all remember, California, y'all know what I'm talking about. When Ice Cube made his first solo album, when he left NWA, his album said, this is the deaf side, but because I believe in balance, we're going to have the life side. Right. Well, someone said, we're just going to have the deaf side. Because if we have the deaf side, we ain't going to be deepening nobody's diversity. We're going to be deepening ignorance and hatred and division. And we'll have black folks and Chicano folks fighting each other at Cal State, LA. That's the deaf side. The life side is, let's figure out how we come together as sisters and brothers. You know what I mean? The culture got destroyed in a serious way by the industry. If you look at the #1 hip-hop album over the last 20 years, same thing over and over again. NIGGAs, BITCHs, drugs, alcohol, disrespect of women. Hyper-materialism. I'm like, how did we go from this thing that was created to be about light to this thing that's become about death? Because someone, the power structure, y'all know who they are. I travel this country. Rosa travels this country. You go to any city, they play the same records over and over again in every single radio station. It doesn't matter if it's hot this, the jamming that, the beat this, it's all the same. You know what I mean? Just like you can go to any inner city, chicken, soul food places. You know what I mean? Spanish food, the same kind of Spanish food. Always the same kind of funeral parlors, same kind of churches, like 50 churches in one block, right? Always a check cash in place, right? Yeah. Always a rental center, right? You tell me that's not intentional everywhere you go. It's intentional. So how we can even talk about deepening diversity if we don't have a working knowledge of American and world history? How can you even talk about it? In addition to having a knowledge of yourself. You know, people could say anything to you, you just get divided from each other. A lot of us, myself, Rosa, we watch this stuff go on, and we've done everything we could, am I right? We've done everything we can to try to say to folks, hey, y'all need to be aware of this. This is intentional. You know what I mean? This is intentional. But this is what's happened to our culture. And as the culture is attacked, it becomes easier to attack these programs around ethnic studies on these college campuses. Because they understand that who's on college campuses? Mostly young people. And if we divert their attention over to all of this stuff, they're not going to organize. They're not going to come to any rallies or marches. You know what I mean? They're not going to vote. You know what I mean? They're just going to be caught up in, oh, Kim Kardashian's naked on the cover of Paper magazine. You know what I'm saying? Y'all feel me? So the question becomes, sisters and brothers, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I want to suggest to you all a couple of things. One, we need to have the courage to have honest conversations about race and racism in America. That's number one. In this country's history, there's never been any real work around that. Not even close. Not even close. Am I making it up? First conversation was called, oh, the Native Americans are here, we want this land. It's called the genocide of Native American people. And then how do we twist it around? We start naming sports teams after these Native Americans. We call them savages. We depict them as savages in movies. Y'all feel where I'm going with this? And make it seem like there's something wrong with them for simply wanting to have their land back. One of the twisted conversations also is what happened to African people. I mean, think about it for a second. I'm in Africa. I just found out a couple years ago through a DNA test that my family comes from Guinea-Bissau, West Africa. I'm like, man, finally I know where I come from. You know, I don't know the language. I don't know the culture. I don't know anything. Because I was kidnapped out of Africa. I was kidnapped out of Africa and brought to this part of the world. It doesn't matter if you were dropped off in South Carolina or Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic or Haiti or Guyana. You just were dropped off in different places. You all were on the same slave ships. And you were stripped of everything. And you were told, your name is now Kevin Powell. And made to love everything about the master. How can you deepen diversity if you love someone else more than you love yourself? Y'all with me out there? You put him on a pedestal. You put her on a pedestal, and you knock down your own culture, your own heritage. When I say we have to have the courage to have an honest conversation about race and racism, this means that we have to have an honest conversation about race and racism. This country was founded on racism. And I don't even like the word founded. Let's talk about what it really is. Someone else was here. And it makes some people uncomfortable to hear this kind of stuff. But you know what? I believe in rainbow coalitions. I believe in people of different backgrounds coming together, but I also know, because I study meteorology, rainbows don't happen until after the storm. And the storm that needs to happen is people having some backbone. Even if there's something that you don't agree with, you got to be willing to hear the perspective of different people. For example, I'm a man. I'm a heterosexual black man in America. 1 out of 4 women in this society will be the victims of sexual assault in their lifetimes. Am I right, ladies? 1 out of 3 on the planet. Did I think about this when I was much younger, emotionally, intellectually? Definitely not. But because of the work that I've been doing and because of my own contradictions, I realized, man, as I'm studying all of this, how can I just be opposed to stuff that's convenient for me and ignore the fact that half the planet's population is fearful that at any given moment, am I right, ladies? You could be the victim of some form of sexual violence. But if I don't have any empathy, if I don't check my privilege, are y'all with me? You know what I mean? Then I'm not going to listen to these women speaking, no matter what their background. Well, the same thing applies to racism. One of the things that Tim Wise says all the time, which I agree with, is that some of our white sisters and brothers, Tim Wise, who don't know, is a white brother from Tennessee who talks about white privilege all the time. Some white folks want black folks to just stop talking about slavery or stop talking about the past. Why you keep bringing that up? What other people are encouraged not to talk about their past? Isn't Columbus Day talking about the past? Isn't Thanksgiving talking about the past from someone else's perspective? You know what I mean? But if I happen to say, look, man, look what my ancestors have gone through. You know what I mean? Africa, slavery, segregation. My great-grandfather was murdered for his land. He was basically lynched. I can't bring that up. So we got to be willing to have some conversations about racism, you know? And race is race plus power. And y'all got to ask yourself this question. Who has power in this country and who does not when it comes to race? Real simple question. You know? Race plus power. Who gets to dictate what's taught in the school system? Who gets to dictate who can have ethnic studies and what it can be like or look like? Who gets to dictate the images that we see in the mass media culture? Who decides that we're going to depict Michael Brown, who's murdered in Ferguson, Missouri, and is led in his own blood for 4 hours? We're going to depict him as a thug, but Darren Wilson, the police officer who murdered him in cold blood, gets to be a hero. Who gets to say that Kurt Busch, a white brother who's a NASCAR race car driver, y'all work with me for a second, all forms of violence are unacceptable. We can agree to that, right? But Kurt Busch whooped his woman's behind the other day, but there's not the mass hysteria when Ray Rice does it. So even when there's ugliness going on, there's even racism in how the ugliness is depicted. You know, all of a sudden black men or black and Latino men are the poster boys for every negative behavior, but a white brother does it. Oh, it's just an aberration. Y'all feel me? So if we're going to talk about deepening diversity, we got to have some honest conversations about every aspect of racism in this society, even if it makes some of us uncomfortable. I'm not with that. I'm not with letting people just get off and not have these conversations. When we talk about what steps do we take, number 2, anyone ever been to a Native American reservation? Anyone got Native American blood? Indigenous people's blood? A few of us. Isn't it sad? How many of us have actually ever even met a Native American? You know? Think about it. Where are they? What happened to them? Does anyone know? Anyone think about when you celebrate Thanksgiving in 2 weeks, what you're actually celebrating? You know, Thanksgiving, thanks for giving up what? And doing what? At whose expense? You know? To me, one of the insane things about racism is that not only does it oppress people, it turns the oppressed people into celebrants of their own oppression. You know what I mean? I don't say happy Thanksgiving. I understand that it's the one time that my family can get together and we can eat together, but I make sure that I say a meditation, a prayer for indigenous people worldwide who have lost their land. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you are Chicano or Mexican, I mean, hell, California, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado. I mean, look at the names of the cities and towns in California. This is Latin America, y'all. You know what I'm saying? How did this happen? You know? And so we have to not only think about our own situation, but deepening diversity means that we also say, wait a minute, let me understand what other people have gone through, you know? As I said earlier, I grew up with Latinos, so I have a deep love for the Latino community. I love everybody. But it bothers me, for example, when I hear African Americans say, well, immigration is not my issue. Yeah, it is, because it's a civil rights and human rights issue. You know what I mean? And these sisters and brothers are inspired by work that we did, and how dare you think that you're better than them or say stuff like they should go back to where they came from. Well, then all of us should go back to where we came from. You know what I mean? Deepening diversity. What else does it mean? It means, sisters and brothers, we got to read, we got to study. I'm going to assume, Rosa and Dr. Abdullah, there's some sort of curriculum in place here for folks to learn about diversity holistically. Is that right? But the responsibility they created, how many of us are serious about doing the study? You know? We have to read. We have to study. You know, I don't even know what else to say, but it bothers me when I go overseas. Like I was in Japan last year. Japanese young brothers and sisters knew more about American history than we do. You know, I'm in Brazil. They knew more about American history than we do. I'm in Nigeria, West Africa. They knew more about American history than we do. You know, here we are in America, and we take for granted basic education. It doesn't make any sense, you know? And I'm saying, how can you deepen diversity if you don't know who you are? You know, or like I live in Brooklyn, and everybody in the world, we're Brooklyn. We claim Brooklyn hard. Where Brooklyn at? Where Brooklyn at? So I started doing a test at home. When I go to schools in Brooklyn, I'm like, how many of y'all represent Brooklyn? Yeah, son, I represent Brooklyn. I said, what does Brooklyn mean? No one knows what I'm talking about. I'm like, it's a Dutch word. It means land of the broken, broken land. You know, when did Brooklyn become part of the rest of New York City? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? You know, I'm like, well, how many people live in Brooklyn? I don't know. How you going to claim something you don't even know anything about it? You know? And so we got to read. We got to study. One of the best things that ever happened to me, we talk about deepening diversity, is traveling. I didn't get on a plane until I was 24 years old. Why not? Because I was poor, and sometimes poverty inspires you to be creative in certain ways. In some ways, it limits you because you don't think you deserve to go anywhere. But once I started traveling, 48 out of the 50 states, 5 out of the 7 continents, I was like, man, I make it a point everywhere I go to learn about different types of people. For example, the last year or so, I've been working with the Welsh because I ignorantly thought the United Kingdom was just only England, like a lot of us thought. Well, there's Scotland, and there's Northern Ireland, and there's Wales. And I'm learning about a writer that I heard about years back named Dylan Thomas. And as I'm in Wales, I'm realizing they have a community in Wales called Tiger Bay, which is the oldest multicultural community in Europe. People look just like y'all. And I'm learning this stuff. And I also learned, wait a minute, here's the connection back to Rutgers University, because one of the heroes in Welsh history is a black man named Paul Robeson, who went to Wales, and because he connected with working class Welsh, white Welsh coal miners as they were striking, and because he was about workers, there was the connection. Do y'all feel where I'm going with this? But if we're not open-minded, we separate ourselves. And like Dr. Abdullah said, we get pitted against each other. We got to travel. We got to travel. Another step in terms of deepening diversity, in my opinion, if you are identified as a white person, and I saw some white brothers and sisters walk out, maybe they had to go, I don't know. Maybe they had to go. I mean, it's all love though, because I love everybody, but maybe some had to go. I love all people. Let me make that very clear over and over again. I love all people. You know what I mean? I couldn't say that 20 years ago, but that's how I feel today, and this is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life. I can't do this work without love. Other people want to spit hate, that's their business. I spit love. You know what I mean? You know? What I'm saying, though, if you happen to identify yourself as a white sister or brother, it doesn't matter if you're poor or super wealthy, just by virtue of your skin color, you have privilege in America. Again, there's nothing wrong with having privilege if you're using it to be an ally to people who have been the victims of the privilege that you might have. Are y'all with me out there? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? And so we have a responsibility. If I identify myself as white, I need to be at the forefront of challenging anyone who's rejecting ethnic studies as a requirement. It can't just be the people of color out there by themselves. You got to be working in your community with other white sisters and brothers saying, hey, man, this is unacceptable. You know what I mean? Why are we still teaching all of this, all these lies? Because that's what they are. They're lies. What else are they but lies, man? You know? It means you got to be an ally. It means sometimes, just like as a man, if I see Rosa or another sister post something about gender violence, about sexism, I can't say, man, here they go again. I got to say, let me listen and let me learn. And let me learn how to articulate this, what they're saying, to other men. Are y'all with me out there? That's what I'm saying to my white sisters and brothers. We don't deepen diversity if you don't participate in the deepening of that diversity. If you don't challenge your own white privilege. There was a white sister who wrote a blog when the Ferguson thing happened, and she said in her blog, she's from Oregon, I believe, all of us are racist. That was a bold thing to say, but she was saying, I'm only what I've been socialized to be. To have a superiority complex because of the education that I've got, and to think that other people are inferior because they weren't even in my history. That takes courage. That's what you got to do if you're serious about deepening diversity and being allies to these folks here. You know what I mean? It's a shame to me in 2014, I want y'all to think about this for a second. It's 2014. It's a shame to me we're still having the same fight on college campuses that we had in 2004 and 94 and 84 and 74 and 64. You know what I mean? It's a shame to me that there are people out there who call themselves progressives, but they're actually nothing more than a bunch of liberals. You know what I mean? Because a progressive, if you're truly progressive, then you challenge privilege and power everywhere. But if you're a liberal, you do everything you can to protect that privilege and power under the guise of being progressive. Y'all feel me? If you're liberal, you'll say things like, well, anyone can teach diversity. No. No. If you're liberal, hold on. If you're liberal, I mean, I want you to think about this for a second. I've been an organizer for 30 years since I was a teenager. You learn over time how to organize, right? You know, you just don't jump out there and say, hey, I'm an organizer. I can't imagine someone who is not qualified. You can't teach diversity, quote unquote, if you are not multilingual in cultural literacy. If you're not able to articulate who you are and you know something about people who are different than you, you've actually spent time in these communities and you absorbed it respectfully and you understand how to teach it. And there are people out there, white brothers like Dr. Mark Nason, who I love, you know what I mean, who can articulate this. But then there are folks who think they can just wing it. Diversity also means if you're progressive, you understand that, you know what, I can't make it seem like everything is all the same. Because what happened, y'all, in the 1990s, I remember when it happened, we went from having real conversations about racism to let's just talk about diversity, multiculturalism. Right. You know what I mean? And when you switch from making it one or the other, it should be both. We should be having conversations consistently about racism. And then, yeah, this is the world that we want to get to, but we can't ignore this racism over here, this power structure. But you got folks who want to ignore that conversation, just say, oh, we're all equals. Let's just come together. I can't tell you how many Dr. King programs I've been to where they water down Dr. King. They don't talk about his life after the I Have a Dream speech. And even the I Have a Dream speech, if you actually read it closely, when he says in there, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, he's saying, here's who you are. You'll sing in the words of the Negro spiritual, here's who we are. He's saying we're all equals, but we're going to come to the table from a position of strength, which is my culture is as valuable as your culture. But at the same time, in that same speech, he talks about police brutality twice. He talks about power all over the place. And at the end of his life, he was still talking about racism. If you don't think so, go read an essay Dr. King wrote the last year of his life called Black Power Redefined. But if we don't read, we don't study, we just think he was some colorblind person just making stuff up as he went along. We just come together. No. Liberals will have you just say, let's just focus on diversity, multiculturalism. But people who are progressives say, no, we got to challenge powers that dominate, structures that dominate people, and we're not going to let racism off the hook. Are y'all with me? That's right. That's the difference. That's the difference. If you're an ally, you challenge power. For the people of color in the room, I mean, I don't even know where to start. I'm just going to speak for myself. I'm tired. There's a brother, Crazy Legs, one of our great B-boys, hip-hop, New York City. We're in the same age range. He's in his 40s as well. He said, man, I'm tired. I've been dancing since I was a teenager, pre-teenager. Anyone who's an organizer, activist knows that you get tired, man. This is why I've been pushing, as Dr. Abdul said, we got to take care of ourselves. This is why I'm a vegan. You know, this is why I run and exercise and all this kind of stuff, because I'm like, this is why I don't drink anymore. I can't tell you how many of my friends are engaged in destructive behavior. It almost happened to me. I'm going to say this. We have got to be out there on a consistent basis. And fellas, it can't just be the women either. You know what I mean? The men have got to step up. We got to show up, fellas. You know what I mean? I don't know how it is here, but everywhere else I go, the women do the work. Dudes show up when the cameras come. Dudes show up when the media's around, but women are doing all the work around ethnic studies. You know what I mean? Even when I got off the plane in August and went straight from St. Louis Airport right to Ferguson, who was out there? A whole lot of women. Right. The dudes were on the sidelines saying F the police, but the sisters were organizing stuff. You know what I mean? And exactly. And I'm saying, people of color here for a second, we got to show up, man. You know, and it can't just be you want to make a speech. Yo, Brother Powell, can I just say something? No. Rosa, I don't know if you remember this, Rosa used to say, we can't just give anybody the microphone. Used to say that. You know what I'm saying? Show up means, when I was coming up as an organizer, you learn how to organize, you learn how to build an organization, you learn how to run an organization, you learn how to run a meeting, you learn how to do a budget, you learn how to be the person standing security. You learn how to speak. You learn how to do everything if you're serious about being an organizer. That's right. You know what I mean? And it means that you understand this is not just some passing phase where I'm going to fight for ethnic studies. This means this is a part of your life for the rest of your life. Am I right, Brother Kieran? This brother reached out to me. He's doing phenomenal work around young men here in Southern California. From the moment that I talked to him, I was like, this brother's committed. He's serious. You know what I mean? That's what we need. We need to multiply, and if you're a leader, you multiply yourself. You know what I mean? You don't want to just be the one. You got to say, I got to get other people out here. And so we got to read, we got to study. You know, how are we going to talk about deepening diversity? I'm going to give you this example from Ferguson. I'm out there in the middle, right where Michael Brown got killed. I hear these brothers across the street, hip-hop heads playing their version of F the Police, which was terrible. It was a horrible hip-hop song the way they was doing it. It wasn't MDLA's version. And so I went across the street, because they were actually, the lyrics in there were offending the women who were doing the work, y'all. Y'all feel where I'm going with this? I said, well, who's the leader over there? They said, a dude with the hat on, and he's loped out. I went over there. I started talking to the dude, and he said, man, you don't understand, man. We got to use the N-word. We got to curse. This is going to reach the people. And I'm saying, this dude don't read no books. I said, bro, you're a genius, man. He got quiet. I said, Langston Hughes, if you really know his poetry, he was writing about the hood the whole time. But how many curse words are all over his poems? 0. And I curse, y'all. Let me make that very clear. I'm from New York. Good morning is our, you don't want to hear how we say good morning. You know what I mean? But I respect y'all and love y'all so much. When I do speeches, you very rarely will hear me curse in public. I don't do that anymore. I don't even curse in my writing anymore. You know what I'm saying? Why not? Because a woman said to me years ago, she heard me read poems somewhere in New York, I can't buy your poetry book because it's filled with curses. I was like, wow, that took me back. I talked to this brother in Ferguson, and this is important, we're talking about deepening diversity. I said, man, do you even know the history of how the N-word has been used in our culture? He had never heard of the Last Poets, had never really listened to Richard Pryor. Y'all feel where I'm going with this? Didn't know the history of hip hop. Y'all feel where I'm going with this? You know what I mean? All he knew was where he was in the moment. If you want to be an in-the-moment organizer, that means that you're going to be pissed off when Trayvon Martin gets killed. You're going to be pissed off when young black and Latino brothers and sisters get killed here in LA for the moment. And then they know you're going to go back to business as usual, not doing anything. Y'all feel me? So I said to the dude, man, you got to be serious about this. It gets better, y'all. Guess what? He was a dude from Chicago, and he was a school teacher. Wow. Organizing people in Ferguson. So how is someone going to take us serious about deepening diversity or organizing in our communities or leading our communities if we don't show up? We don't read, we don't study, we don't travel, we're not becoming critical thinkers, we don't know who we are, you know, no matter what our cultural background is, we don't know the history of this country, we don't know current events, we don't travel anywhere, we ain't got passports. Y'all feel me? We don't speak another language. Where my Latino brothers and sisters at out here? We're bilingual, right? Sí, claro, es la verdad. We got to be bilingual. And y'all who don't know what the hell I'm talking about, you need to learn what I'm talking about. And I learned that from my Boricua sisters and brothers just growing up. And so deepening diversity means I understand how important it is to speak another language, you know? And at the end of the day, the last thing I'll say, because we're going to do Q&A, is that right? This has got to be about love, because this is thankless work. And Rose and I have talked about this. April Silva and I have talked about this. There's no real, am I right, brother? There's no real money in this. You do it because you care. You know, you do it because you understand this is the world that I want to see, where we're all equals here and everyone's represented equally. You know, it's sacrificial, it's lonely, it's hard, it's difficult. I'm not saying don't make a living. You should make a living. You should do something with your life. I'm happy that I can make a living in some form of my life. But at the end of the day, when I go to sleep, I want to know that I've done something that helps something along the way for freedom, justice, and equality for all people. Are y'all with me out there? You know what I mean? And I help someone to understand that you are not ugly, you're not unattractive, you do have a history, you know? And you can hear it in our communities when we say things like, I don't know, I'm trying, I'm hoping to. The self-esteem, the low self-esteem is tied to not knowing who we are. So we got to pick ourselves up. And we got to love ourselves, because how could you love anyone else if you don't even love yourself? That's it. So thank y'all so very much. And I'm looking forward to questions.
I'm Chinese.
Yes.
As well.
God bless you. Peace.
Loud and clear. I read your bio online. I always do my research on your time. You're very times. Twice. Are you going to run for a third time?
Absolutely not.
Why?
Because we're building BK Nation, our organization. That's way more important to me, number one. Number two, the American political system is so predicated on how much money you have or don't have. I don't want to be a part of that. What I want to be a part of is this right here, where this is real freedom. I believe in real freedom. And real freedom is being able to say what I feel like saying and doing what I feel like doing. You know what I mean? And you don't, you know, ask yourself a question. What position did Dr. King have or Malcolm X have? They did the work. Just do the work to bring people together, to teach, give people the tools so they can be empowered for themselves in their local communities. That's what we should be about, right? People should be empowered in their local communities. That's what I want to do. And that's what I'm going to continue to do for the rest of my life. You know, I don't regret anything that I've done in my life, but if I had to do it over again, I sure would not have done that. Took 4 years off my life. You know what I'm saying? And then it brings out the ugliness in a lot of people. You know, it almost made me want to leave Brooklyn. And I love Brooklyn.
Leave the country.
Yeah, word, son. You know what I mean? Word. Yes, sir.
When you're talking about getting out and doing something, and you know you're spreading the knowledge and you're getting people into it, I wanted to know how do you feel about reaching out to those older generations, those old dogs that can't learn new tricks, that have been so set in their ways, them holy rollers, them people that will not let go of what they've been holding on to for so long. It's like, do we just abandon those people, or because I mean, it seems like it's a futile effort. I mean, you be 50, 60, 70 years old, loving white supremacy, and you can't stop them.
My work is with everyone. You know, people always say, Kev, you work with young people. No, I work with everyone. But I will say that I think that younger people, are more likely to be open-minded about ideas. You know, I think as you get older, like I love my mother, and in some ways, my mother is like the most revolutionary, pro-feminist leader I've ever met in my life. She's the first leader I've ever met. But when she starts talking about certain things, she still whispers the word white, even if there are no white people around. You know what I mean? You know, she'll tell me stuff like, you better leave those white people alone. I'm like, I'm not bothering any white people, Mom. You know what I'm saying? My mother is 71 years old, born in 1943, and I have to understand she comes from a different time. You know what I mean? And so we still have to love folks, you know, and understand that some people are going to play different roles. And my mom is always going to have my back no matter what. I know if I'm down and out, my mother's got me. My mother's never gonna come to a rally, march, nothing. That's not happening. It's not happening. But she got my back, so I understand that's her lane. You know what I mean? And I just think that you just gotta tell the truth, your truth, whatever it is, no matter what. And you know, someone out there is gonna hear. If we spend a lot of time worrying about, well, this person's not getting that person, no. Tell it to the folks that you think are most likely, you know? Right. And I just think that young people, I was 18 years old, I was ready for that because I was a rebel already, and it just needed to be directed. Do you feel what I'm saying? Yeah. You know, so that's what I say. Yes, sir. Kieran.
I would say I'm real big on practical stuff, and the fact that you already have stuff going as far as like the BK Nation. Can you tell us more about that and how people can be involved?
It's tied to the sister's question, the sister from China. After running for office, even when we were running for office, one of the things that came up a lot, and you probably saw this too when you were running for office, people would ask you, you know, what about these services? Where can I go for a GD program? Where can I go to get some money to go to Cal State LA? You know, I need to get a program. I need to get my kids into a YMCA summer program. So we found ourselves, even when we were running for office, doing basically constituent services. Like, okay, here's the information, here's the resources. And one of the things we did, we would call local elected officials in New York. We'd call, no offense, the church people. No one had any answers. No one had a directory. We're like, this is insane. Here we are. Right. I got this thing in my back pocket, the iPhone 6. We got more technology than ever before, but people don't know where to go for a GD program. It doesn't make any sense. So we said, let's create this organization where we're going to blend traditional grassroots organizing, which is what we do. We've been involved in the Ferguson situation, Trayvon Martin, et cetera, but also take the technology. This is coming up next year, y'all. You can go to BK Nation in about 6 months. We're literally rebuilding the site now. No matter which of the 50 states you're on, you can click on that state. California, here's job posting, here's GD programs, here's Kieran, here's Rosa Clemente, here's Dr. Abdullah. We're serious about this. Let's be a clearinghouse of resources, information, and services. A lot of us already do it on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook anyway. Why not consolidate this information? Right. It's not that the information is not out there. People simply don't know where to go to get it. You know what I mean? And so that's where our thing came from. You know, give people the tools where they can catch their own fish. Instead of, you know, because I think I was saying to Dr. Abdul in the car, as an organizer, and a lot of us are guilty of this, how many of y'all are organizers out there? What we tend to do, you are an organizer, if someone asks us for help, we just do it for them a lot of times. Right. Man, that does people a disservice. You know what I mean? A 15-year-old young lady said to me this summer, the job of a leader is to create other leaders. Well, let's give them the tools to be leaders. You know what I mean? This is why I've said to Dr. Abdullah the last day, this is where it came from. I'm like, enough of, I don't want my face up there. You know, I don't want any credit for anything. I just want to be a vessel so I can help other people do what they got to do. You know what I mean? I think one of the paradigms we got to move away from is this grand poobah, this big old national leader, and, you know, usually a he because it's sexist. You know what I mean? It's always male-centered. And as if he is the savior for everybody. No, every one of us in this room can be a savior and an empowerer, a liberator. Am I right? We just got to share the tools and resources with each other. That's what I feel. Yes, ma'am? And then over. bknation.org. It's up, bknation.org. Yes, ma'am. I like that cowboy hat. I would like a cowboy hat. Okay.
I want to share this. My baby sister and I, we were talking a couple nights ago, and we were discussing racism, and my name is Bo. And she was saying, you know, Bo, you don't have to hate other people just because you love yourself.
I agree.
And love being what you are. And this is how I feel. I love being black, everything about blackness. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I hate other ethnicities. And I think this is what people have to understand. that all ethnicities have to learn to love themselves. But that doesn't mean that you have to go out here and do something abusive to a person of a different ethnicity or something hateful or to perpetuate hate. You know, this is where I'm coming from.
I agree. I agree. Yes. I'm sorry, I see you too.
Right now, like a lot of I feel like a lot of our culture is getting very melted together. When it comes to like, you know, how hip hop, even though it's industry hip hop, it's like a lot of different people of all different ethnicities listen to hip hop. But I also want to know, I feel like the racial discussion is becoming like not part of it. A lot of students, even younger, they don't want to talk about racism. They don't want to feel like it's something that's.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
You know, do you like? How do you like? If I'm talking to somebody, and right now, you walk down the street, you'll hear Asian people call themselves nigga, like no problem. And I wonder, like, how do you constantly like keep reminding people without, I don't know, like spoiling the party, like being that old guy or being that person that's like, hey, this is where that come from, you know?
The old guy at the club.
You know what I mean? Because I'm like 30, they were like, you old.
You 30, you're old? You know. Then I'm ancient. I'm in my 40s. No, but he what's your name, sir?
Lewis.
He raises an excellent question. I mean, and this needs to be said. That whole term post-racial, we need to bury that immediately. That is, we don't want to live in a post-racial society. We want to live in a society that's post-racism. It's a totally different thing. And if it's society's post-racism, that means that we've done the work. We've done the work. We've done the work at Cal State LA, in California, all around this country to fight systemic racism. Are y'all with me out there? And so there's a lot of confusion out there. Part of it is because I was at Vibe magazine 20 years ago, right? And I saw it coming because Vibe was owned by Time Warner, and they were like, you know, it was like this whole thing where they started saying, well, urban is everybody. We're like, nah, urban's not everybody. If you're not really from the city, you're not really urban, you know what I'm saying? And the culture, again, you know, does hip hop belong to everyone now? Yeah, but I always say African Americans, Latinos, and West Indians created, poor people created hip hop. You know what I'm saying? Poor people created hip hop. What do I mean by that? When Dr. King, at the end of his life, came out against the Vietnam War, American imperialism, overseas in Asia, right? When he was saying we're sending poor blacks and poor whites to fight poor yellow people in Vietnam, also what came out of that was a struggle for economic justice, Poor People's Campaign. He's killed, but there's an overlap between that period and those poor people in places like the Bronx, New York, who created hip hop. Y'all feel me? Right. And the reality is there's still massive poverty in this country. There's still people of color, particularly at the bottom of the economic ladder, blacks and Latinos, and we see it in the prison industrial complex because it's loaded with us. This country imprisons more people than anywhere else on the planet. That's right. And who do they look like? Black and brown people. So how can you say there's no racism? You know what I mean? But what happens because of the mass media culture, if I turn on ESPN, how many of y'all sports fans like I am, right? All you see all day are $1 million athletes on ESPN, and then you switch to Fuse TV, all you see is black and brown rappers. You would think that we just balling. That's right. Nah, there's 500 NBA players and 2,000 football players. That's 2,500 people. Then you're lucky if 50 rappers actually make real money. But if you show the same images over and over again, it gets amplified, and it becomes this perception that these people are doing well, so what the heck are they complaining about? And then if you grew up in a school system just like I did, it doesn't matter if you were born in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 2000, if you still grow up in a school system that doesn't teach you anything about yourself, you're going to believe, oh, there's no racism. Or I heard people say sometimes, I had to go down south to find racism. No. Like Malcolm X said, my hero, south is south of the Canadian border.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
And don't go to Canada and ask them, because they tell you
yeah.
that they're pretty south, the darn south.
Exactly, exactly. If you talk to people calling Toronto, Montreal, they say the same thing. So I say that the challenge is not about being an old person, quote unquote, it's challenging ignorance. And saying to people, look at these examples. Because what ends up happening, if people don't think about this stuff, Ferguson's a shock to them. Right. Trayvon is a shock to them. And that should not be a shock to you. Guess what, y'all? Those are famous cases, but this happens every single day in this country. You know what I mean? So that's what I say. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, since you have experience in the American political system. And,
I think we all do. It's called Social Security numbers.
actually being on there and running the campaign.
Yes, sir.
And you were talking about like the brokenness of the American political system and electoral politics. Do you think that there's any way to overcome those structural inherencies, or
You got to change it completely. You got to flip
or
it.
do, like, and how do you think that we go about completely changing the system?
I'm going to say to you what Eve Ensler, anyone know who Eve Ensler is? She wrote the Vagina Monologues. You know who she is, right? She said to me after my second campaign, you just go, you need to create what you want to see. Just go build what you want to see. You know, that's what I feel. Build what you want to see. For me, is what we're doing with BK Nation. Kieran has his work that he's doing with young men. You know, other folks out here are doing work. Build what you want to see. You know, that's what I say. Rosa, she was a part of the forefront of the movement. What was the hip hop political? Say what it was. National Political Hip Hop. National Political Hip Hop. National Hip Hop Political Convention. Can we say that it's possible that a Ras Baraka could have been inspired by that?
Yes.
And become mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Now, Ras is a unique situation because he's several generations of his own family in Newark, number one. He's rooted in that community, number two, in a very different kind of way. And the people love the Baraka family there. And, you know, and so that's a unique situation. In Brooklyn, where I was running for office, man, they was trying to destroy me. You know, in spite of, people were making stuff up like, Kevin, don't do nothing in the community. I was like, wow, I went from doing all this stuff in the community to I don't do anything in the community. You know what I'm saying? And some of the folks were white brothers and sisters, some of them were black and Latino brothers and sisters. It didn't matter because the system often corrupts people, and we start, what did Dr. Abdul say? We fight each other over crumbs. You know, I'm not interested in fighting over crumbs. I'm interested in liberation. There's two different things. If y'all want crumbs, you can get some crumbs. That ain't hard to get. But do you want to be free? You know what I'm saying? And so I'm not saying that people shouldn't run for office. I think you should run for office. You know, like, what's the name of the person that y'all supporting? Say it nice and loud.
Carlos Montes.
We should support people like that who are truly progressive and about the community. We should support people like that. But I think you take it on a case-by-case basis. You know what I mean? If it's Rosa Clemente, if it's Ras Baraka, these people are about the community. But if it's someone who just wants to be a politician, come on, son. We got enough of those politicians. We got more black and Latino politicians than we had ever before. And look at in worse conditions. Every hood looks the same. Here than here. You had your hand up?
Brother, I really enjoyed your talk. First, brother mentioned the thing about politics.
Yes, sir.
That's my issue. When are we going to have a real conversation about the fact that politics in America is corrupted to the point where, look at our brother in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
He's made to look powerless.
Well, he's a spokesperson for the power structure.
Because he's facing a system where he's a good man, but he can't turn that system around. That system is literally destroying him. When are we going to have the conversation about economic justice and the fact that at the end of his life, Dr. King recognized that the real thing was economics? Right here.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Do you own a business?
Absolutely.
Do you own where you live?
No, I do not.
Okay, at least you own a business. So yes. I think the conversation about economic justice starts with, am I an example of what I want to see in my community? Am I teaching other people how to be financially literate, financially empowered?
And I just want to say this in closing. One of the things I admire about Mexican people, in particular in California,
yes, sir,
is that when you look in these communities, they have their businesses, they run them, they have their whole neighborhoods, and I think that African American people, we can benefit from looking at that, more so than looking at the political dynamic and seeing that economic justice and economic solvency, as in Koreatown and all these other places, they get benefit from that. Because it's amazing to come to LA. I grew up in New York just like you in Brooklyn.
Okay.
I've been in California for 15 years.
Yes, sir.
And to find out that soul food in LA is made by Chinese people.
Is that true? I mean, it is what it is. Not all of it.
Is it Chinese food?
But
And if they're black restaurants, people cooking the food are likely not black people. There's like 2 black restaurants in LA.
But can I say this? Let me say this. I do study, I learn from all people. So it could be the Chicano community, it could be the Asian community. I do study different communities. How do you build community? But I also want us to be very careful when we're talking about deepening diversity, the name of this program, for us not to unwillingly diss ourselves in our own history. Because if you look at LA or Oakland or New Orleans or Atlanta, all these communities have had what you described with Koreatown, etc. But there was something called integration coming out of the Civil Rights Movement that destroyed it. But the fight was for desegregation, but we confused access with success, and it drained away all of those structures that you're talking about. You know what I mean? How do I know? When I started off as a journalist many years ago, I wrote for black newspapers. They were powerful in their day, but by the time I got these newspapers, they were fragments of each other because everybody wanted to write for all the, we thought someone else's Kool-Aid tasted better than our Kool-Aid, basically. You know what I'm saying? And so I just want us to be careful of dissing ourselves without also acknowledging, well, there's a historical reality here of what happened. And then my question becomes, okay, how do we build this in these times? You know, that's why I asked the question, well, do you own something? I own something, you know, and are we also teaching other people how to be financially empowered? I actually believe at this point, and I've been an organizer since the 80s, that we almost got to reinvent the entire wheel of the basics. You know what I mean? Because a lot of folks don't even know what you're talking about when you say economic justice with Dr. King. Here, then here. Well, I'm sorry, she had her hand up first. I apologize.
I just wanted to get back to the political, you're talking about the political world.
Yes, ma'am.
Back in the 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s, I was involved in the Latino community as
Yes,
far as
ma'am.
getting Latinos elected. And it was a little frustrating because as soon as they get elected, they get very comfortable.
That's right.
And they start just kind of, you know, with the whole, you know, they want to keep everything the same.
Right.
And like you said, it is worse than, you know, any other I guess, political leader. So I know for Carlos Montes, since my husband is working his campaign, he's actually his consultant, I know that he's going to make a difference.
Right.
And you got to find people like that, and they're very rare.
Ras Baraka,
and
Newark.
also, just like you said, you have to duplicate yourself as a leader. And a lot of these other Latino leaders did not duplicate themselves.
That's right.
Did not even try to get anyone else up into the system, which I think is a big failure on their part.
You know, it's interesting you said it because in Brooklyn, which Brooklyn has the biggest black community in America. We actually have 1 million black folks in the borough of Brooklyn, 3 million people in total. So we'd actually be the 4th biggest city in America if we were a separate city. A lot of the old school black activists in Brooklyn said to me they regret that they did not learn the political system themselves. They just pushed black folks that they just as long as someone was black or Latino, let's vote for them.
Exactly.
And that should no longer be the criteria by itself. Someone's black or Latino.
Or the two-party system.
Or the two-party system.
That's the problem.
That is the problem.
Nobody wants to talk about the two-party system. I really don't care how progressive you think you're going to be as a Democrat.
Right.
You eventually will not be able
That's
to
right.
be. And you learned that lesson.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Hard.
They wouldn't support me.
And couldn't depend on third parties that are forcibly kept off the ballot.
Yep.
And then the larger picture is
Yeah.
Citizens United and the money.
That's
so
right.
Are we looking to be integrated in the political system? I think that's probably why you chose the electoral, right? That's why you chose I will never run again, because
Yeah.
you saw from the inside.
That's right.
Probably the compromises you would have to have made quickly.
Very quick. And Rose's point, in New York City, it's Democrats. But you can't blame the Republicans. But they were clear. We only want certain types of people to be in office. I was like, well, I clearly don't fit that. Yeah, and I'm not a puppet. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Classes with Dr. Malik Talcott and Dr. Abdullah, and I'm curious about the paradoxical nature of capitalism. When I look at my ancestors, primitive capitalism being the method with which enslavement was made possible and encouraged, and I'm concerned about the fetishization of multicultural language, which is obscuring the bigger demon in the room. And I'm struggling with how do I become complicit in a capitalist system that cannot be equal, cannot by any stretch, I'm nervous, sorry, cannot by any stretch of the imagination be equal at all. And so we have a conversation about multiculturalism when I think that capitalism creates class dichotomy and racism by design. So how do we have why are we not having a paradigm shift? Why are we not talking about the bigger elephant in the room, which is the demon of capitalism?
Talk about it. You got the floor.
Because we're in America?
No, we're here. We say whatever you feel.
Right, so it's got to change.
I agree.
You know, we have, I challenge anyone to suggest that capitalism can be fair. And capitalism
It's never meant to be fair.
is close. The language has shifted largely away from racism to class warfare, which is really obfuscation. Because if you look at poor ethno-racial minorities in the lower echelon of class, what does the lower class look like? Who predominates the lower class?
I agree.
And so the conversation really is, how do we get past, how do we modify a system how do we have a hybrid system that works better than this neoliberal capitalism that is straight from the bowels of hell?
I don't know if you could You want to answer that?
No, I just want to like add a little bit because I feel like we're still beating around the bush, and like we're talking about reinventing the wheel or like kind of starting from scratch. But the reality is like, and we've been talking about this in class, and it's a Malcolm X quote, but you can't have capitalism without, I mean, we said it before, without racism.
That's right.
So we don't need racism. We know that. So we need to destroy what? Capitalism. Exactly. And that's what we need. Revolution. That's what we need. And I'll say it. So that's my, my point of view.
And I happen to agree with it. But my question is this, as a long-term organizer,
What do we do?
we have to start with raising the consciousness of people because there's the need for a consciousness movement so you can actually be aware of what this is about. One of the beautiful things about the Black Panther Party is that they actually educated people about the system that they were living under. You understand what I'm saying? That's what's often missing in the work that we do, We'll say, oh, capitalism, we'll say these different things, but very few people actually break down, here's what it is. A real simple definition to me is capitalizing on the misery of everyday working class people. That's what capitalism is. It's real basic. And as long as this system exists, you're going to always have these layers, these hierarchies, and these levels of despair. You know what I mean? When I look at where I come from, when I go back to my community in Jersey City, Brooklyn, where I live, I don't see how people can ever get out of it. Capitalism means that if you live in Fort Greene Projects in Brooklyn, New York, for example, which sits on 11 acres of land, we're going to act like you're not even there, and we're going to just build high-rise buildings all around you. That's what's going on. Gentrification is an easy way to get it. That's capitalism. You know what I mean? But my question, these are tools. We have these conversations. How do we raise the consciousness of people, community to community, in 2014, so we can begin to organize around this? You know what I mean? That's what I say. Then the last part is, what do we want to create? Right. We talked about this. What do we want to create? Right. Who wanted to speak? Am I missing people over here too? I'm sorry.
Let him go first.
This is a great conversation. This is a necessary conversation.
I was going to add to what he's saying. I think about my entire college experience. How many classes have you had that really gave you a true background or just a look at capitalism, like an Adam Smith course? A Keynes course. They don't do that. They give you the glorified version.
Absolutely.
And that's the issue. People don't understand what capitalism is. It was never meant to be a system of any type of distribution. It was to create product.
Any system where the first global economy is slavery, it's problematic.
It's got to redistribute in some way. It doesn't. It's not meant to. It was never created to distribute any type of goods. It creates. And what happens is the creators or the producers at some point get to a point where they can say, you know what, I can continue to produce. I don't even need, well, they do need, but I don't need a middle class to spend if I can cut costs and keep my production at the same level.
And this is why Dr. King became dangerous. As long as he was just talking about integrating buses, but when he started talking about economic injustice and a radical redistribution of the wealth, you know what I mean? Yes.
I was at the day that Occupy Wall Street movement began. I was with them in New York until the government rolled in and said, and I was telling them, the government is not going to allow us to have these conversations much longer. Yeah. And I remember the beautiful, young, brilliant whites that were there that were saying, oh, this is our country and the Constitution. And I told them, that you'll see what happens with the Constitution when the government decides enough of this shit. Sure enough, we know what happened to that. Because if you're going to talk about we against capitalism in America, you better be ready to go to war. If you're going to talk about you against capitalism, you're saying that professor, that beautiful sister that brought us here tonight, is going to get fired. They're going to imprison you, brother. If you get up and
I don't care. But okay.
You have to be ready for that. If
I trust
you against capitalism.
I've been penalized my whole life.
Right.
I'm cool.
So everybody needs to better understand that when you're talking about you against capitalism, you saying lock me up and throw away the key. Because the people that run this nation intend to keep it going by any means necessary.
But they changed the narrative. The one thing Occupy did, and we can never forget, is they changed the narrative and raised the consciousness.
That's right.
And it's the same thing that's happening in Ferguson.
That's right.
And I would venture to say that in our resistance, there's victory.
Yeah.
And we have to claim moments like that.
Yeah. And I agree with Rosa. One of the things that we got to be careful of, I'm going to say it like this, brother. When I came home, my first break from college, I said to my mother, everything we're saying here, I said to my mother. And you know, she got quiet and she said to me, finally, you know what they did to Dr. King? because the fear had been in her head since the 60s that if you say certain things, you're going to get in trouble. And I'm saying that we got to be really careful. If you're serious about organizing and changing this entire thing, then you got to be fearless, man. Right. You can't put things out there like, well, this is, you know, we got to be careful. I don't really care, man. Right. I don't care. You know what I mean? And Rosa, don't clap for me. Rosa said it best. It's like we got to look for those victories. You know what I mean? These are important. It's a victory that we're having this conversation in here. Because I can tell you, and Rosa can tell you, these conversations weren't happening. There was a time when you call yourself an activist, that was a dirty word to people. You know what I'm saying? We had a sister back there who had her hand up for a while. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's cool, that's cool. I was going to say about capitalism, it's always going to exist where there's money to be made. And even if we're not directly benefiting from it, it's going to exist. So my suggestion is for us to direct our money, put our money in our own businesses, and that's all I can think of. I mean, really, if you want to make a difference, don't shop on Black Friday unless it's your own business or, you know, black business, whatever. But I wouldn't go to Walmart.
I mean, and to her point, like I consciously live a very simple life. I'm very unmaterialistic because how can I say I'm against something that I'm participating in wholeheartedly? We got two hands back there, the sister and the brother.
I just wanted to bring up one that I keep hearing you mention about electoral politics, and just tied into the conversation when people were talking about socialism and revolution. And I want to quote Amiri Baraka, who said, "How are you going to overthrow imperialism when you can't elect a dog catcher?" You know, so when people say they're not going to participate in electoral politics, maybe 5 years ago it wouldn't have bothered me so much, but I was able to go, and being from California too, I was able to go and witness what was going on in Newark, New Jersey. And Rasbrock had been running for 20 some odd years. He had been organizing in his community. He brought the graduation rate up from 50 to 80% at Central High School where he was a principal. He eliminated the gang culture, and so I mean, he's just not somebody just flapping off at the mouth. He was somebody who's deeply rooted in his community, and his father was like the elder of a village, and they really raised the consciousness of their people in there. And Amir Baraka said that there should be evidence that you live in the place that you live at. And so the groundwork had been laid for his son to come in and take over the city, and there were poor people, and we were out there marching through the projects, and just like the projects, I came from East Palo Alto, and it was the most powerful.
Are you from East Palo Alto?
Yeah,
wow.
And it was the most powerful thing, especially being from California. They don't go hard in their politics like that. Out there, they scrapping, they making songs dissing the other candidate. You know what I mean? Like I was able to do a song about something real. I've been doing music for so long, and I finally was able to do a song like for the candidacy. And I raised that to say, like, I understand that there's a system that's been put in place for a Democrat or this or that, but still, like, take it off as a religion. It's like, oh, I'm so far left, or I'm such a revolutionary purist, and I'm not even going to participate in the system, because you're still going to spend money with presidents on it that were slave owners and whatnot. You got to participate in that system. And like the Chicano brother was talking about, electing Carlos Montes, putting people in there that are really about something, you know, and not just turn your other cheek. And then the last thing I just want to say is a quote from Mao: "Unite the many, defeat the few." You know, and I still think it takes unity. Unity without uniformity, you know what I'm saying? But still be able to come together, because at the end of the day, like, if you're gonna overthrow capitalism, you can't do it just as poor whites, or just as black folks, or just as Chicanos. Like, we gotta have black and brown unity. We gotta have unity with the workers, and so that's my.
Six more. Oh. Say it again, sir.
What do you see the differences in the imagery and the popular media culture when you work in at 5 in hip hop and at Live versus now? Like back then, you had like the MC Lights, the Queen Latifahs. There's diversity in hip hop and media culture.
Well,
now I feel like there's more like a my view and kind of like force feeding, where you hear the radio, you see a billboard,
yeah.
You walk down the street, it's kind of like they're force feeding you. This is what you should do. Like,
well, you know, let's do a quick history lesson. We kind of talked about it earlier. Like, if you go from 1986, 87 to, like, let's say around when Tupac and Biggie got killed, 96, 97, you know, we call it the golden era of hip hop. You know, it was a diversity of voices. But something interesting started happening in the early 1990s. Ice-T, your brother from here on the West Coast, put out a song called Cop Killer. He gets attacked. It was a fictionalized song, but everyone made a big deal out about it. When NWA came out, because of their song F the Police, they were tracked by the FBI. I don't know if people remember that or aware of that. You know what I'm saying? Go ahead.
Even Uncle Luke, he went all the way to the Supreme Court, right?
Yeah.
with that, and like even then where he was like he basically got in trouble for women twerking in his videos.
Yeah.
And now we're
well, the problem is that
Miley Cyrus,
but the problem is I'm not even concerned about Miley Cyrus. Miley Cyrus can do whatever she wants. The problem is that the bodies of hip hop have always been black and brown bodies, and all of a sudden what Luther Campbell was doing in one video has become the norm.
That's right.
That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? The lack of diversity. Tupac, who I interviewed many times when I was at Vibe, he used to say to me, man, I wanted Thug Life to be something positive, but the record label said to me, that doesn't sell anymore. Well, it doesn't sell anymore if you don't play it on the radio anymore. You know what I mean? When I was at Vibe Magazine, when we started Vibe Magazine, I was writing articles that were 6,000 or 7,000 words. All of a sudden, the people in the suits came downstairs to the writers, myself, and said, and other writers, and said, oh, the readers, we did a poll, the readers don't want to read long articles anymore. I never saw that poll. All of a sudden, the articles got shortened, and there was more ads, and all of a sudden, if I wrote a negative review about an artist, we got a call saying the label doesn't like what you said about the artist. I'm like, well, the album's whack. You know what I'm saying? And so what I'm getting at is, since we were talking about capitalism, what is one of the tools of capitalism? Co-optation, over and over again. Redirecting, you know what I'm saying? And that's what happened to the culture, to the point where you see it today, these destructive images. The worst thing that I hear, what bothers me when I hear people who are so-called revolutionaries, they condemn the artists. I'm like, or our young people, I'm like, we're just doing what we're given. That's what's happening. You know, it's like, you know, in Ferguson, I'll give you Ferguson. Oh, I heard over and over again, I don't know if you heard it too, like, if these young people just start getting so many tattoos, they just pull their pants up. Right. Come on, son. If they vote. And word. If they just vote. No, I always say vote and organize and do everything else. The struggle is multi-dimensional. You know what I'm saying? But the pants ain't gonna come up if the consciousness isn't coming up, if the opportunities are not there, if there's no jobs there, if the school system sucks, if you're just stuck in the hood. Why would you? I mean, I was sagging. My generation started sagging. It was our way of saying, you know what, this world don't care about us anyway. So you know, you feel me? You know what I mean? And so when I was talking about the minstrel show earlier, y'all should look that up. What was that about? Why was that the #1 entertainment in America for 100 years? You know what I'm saying? And why is it so similar, the images, to what we see today? You know what I mean? Think about that. So you got to connect these dots here. This is a function of capitalism. So y'all brought up capitalism. One of the ways that capitalism works is to control the images. Yes, ma'am. Let's let this be the last one. I'm sorry.
Two things, briefly.
Yes, ma'am.
It's hard for me, if anyone here knows. First, with respect to the issue of capitalism, I think that, and I guess the two go together, we've got to be intentional. And part of what you're talking about in terms of knowing history, knowing what has happened before, helps us to be intentional. There was a world before capitalism where people survived and thrived and enjoyed life. Somehow we have this notion that's been given to us that without capitalism, you become that African, I'm from Ghana, sitting in the sand, eating grubs, right? Scratching in the dirt, eating grubs, suffering from Ebola, because capitalism is out of life. When in fact we know it's the opposite, right? And the reason you're scratching in the dirt, suffering from Ebola, is because of capitalism. We had civilizations that are parts of the wonders of the world before capitalism. So you don't need capitalism. Capitalism is not a given. Capitalism is not something that's here forever and will forever stand. It just got here. We about to kick it in its ass and send it away. Woo! Having that intentional world, then we begin to, that's how we deepen the diversity. That we decide what do we want our world to look like.
Exactly.
Not based upon what it is right now, not based upon the miseducation that we've been given about what can happen. Really, literally close our eyes and decide what do we want to see.
Yeah.
And then we move towards that.
Yeah.
And that intentional work is what is going to allow us to raise the contradictions, educate the masses, and move forward. But if we allow ourselves to get stuck into this notion that this cage that we're in is it, and that we can't move beyond it, then we're not going to get anywhere. You know, so we have to say to ourselves, we have to be intentional. Yes, it's true. Everything we have on our bodies, someone sweated and cried for it to happen. Right? It's clothes. We don't know how many kids lost fingers. You know, this is what I talk about in my classes. We know that this is the case. That doesn't mean we have to get trapped in that.
That's right.
We can envision a world in which we can have clothes, and we can have technology, and we can have these things without it being exploitative, without it being all of those things that capitalism is. And that's what we should move towards freely, with fearless discipline.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Wow. You know, as she was talking, you know, I'm glad you brought up Ebola. When I was in college, a little thing that became a big thing called AIDS popped up. And the way we're blaming Ebola on African people, AIDS was the same thing blamed on people of color. You know, history comes back around. If we don't read, we miss these things. That's number one. Number two, she's right. What does it look like? Tony Medina, great Puerto Rican poet from the Bronx. He's a PhD teaching at Howard University in D.C. He and I always said, well, the world that we want to see is, let's just share. No one should starve. Everyone should have a place to live. You know what I'm saying? Real basic stuff, right? If you want to go to school, you should better go to school. Get a holistic education where you actually learn about yourself, you know. Sharing, you know what I mean? That's what I want to see. And people will say, well, that's you're a Marxist, you're a Leninist, you're a socialist. You know what? I believe in sharing. That's what I believe in. That's my philosophy. I share. If you want to eat, we going to eat. You know what I mean? That's how we get down.
It's like, do you share with your family? What's the difference?
Well, ain't we all family?
You know
what I'm saying?
If I'm in the community, I just think about this. I'm from Oakland, California.
Yes, sir.
When I'm
The
in my
town.
City, yeah. But anyways, you know, if I'm in my area and I know that there are people struggling, I know that eventually a struggle is either going to come back at me.
Yeah.
If I'm prospering and everyone else on that block is struggling, it's going to come back full circle. So what you need to do, just in general, is think of your community as a part of you. Otherwise, it really does take a village to raise a child.
One of my mentors is Dr. Jerry Ward from Mississippi. He said that wisdom is not private property. He said that to me a long time ago. Man, people who hit me up on Twitter and Facebook, they're like, yo, can you share what you know. Share what you know. That's what we've been doing here. Like she said intentional. Every lecture that I do, the speech is cool, but the most important part of it is this. This is intentional on my part. You know what I mean? That's why I say you got the floor. If you got something to say about capitalism, let's roll with it, man. You know what I mean? And then we share with each other, and I hope that we take something from it. The only thing I ask is that y'all keep organizing and keep kicking someone in the ass that's oppressing us. You know what I'm saying? You want to say the last thing, sir?
Yeah. So, man,
Pardon my language. I said I don't curse. I said, but bleep that out.
I find myself struggling with this question. It's funny, when I first started this question, everybody was talking about the elephant in the room and getting rid of capitalism and doing something about it. But I mean, I might be judged for what I say by some people, but at the end of the day, I look at it and I don't see a peaceful solution to ultimately eradicating it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really thought about it the other day. I was writing a piece. I'm a poet. I wrote a piece, and I said something like, you could get all the sheep together, but the wolf still got teeth. They got thermonuclear weapons. They got burners. They'll take us out. I mean, we could get out there. We could do all that. But at the same time, they want to annihilate us, and they will annihilate us. What do we do about it? I look to the Black Panthers. They're like my heroes. It's like, I don't think we're going to win it with kumbayas. I think we're going to win it with bullets and burners and grenades and going up in there and handling it. How do you feel about that? I hope I'm not the only person that thinks
No, you're not the only person. You're not the only person that thinks like that.
That's the honest one.
Yeah, but probably because there's agents in this room, not always going to say that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But there's never been Malcolm said it best, a peaceful revolution.
Right.
You know what I mean? But here's my thing, you know, because someone who came up in all these different types of organizations, everything you just said, we've said. I ain't gonna just roll with anybody with a gun. You gotta know what you. So the consciousness part of it has to be there. You know what I'm saying? Let's go back to the Black Panther Party. We glamorized the gun part of it, but there was also an education that went with that. You know what I mean? And it was also work in the community, the breakfast program, all the things they were doing. And so it has to all be there together. You know what I mean? That's my response to you. And if we get to a point where we say, as a community of people, this is what we want to do, then man, I have nothing to lose. I ain't supposed to be here this long. You know what I'm saying? That's how I feel. But at this stage where we are right now, I don't see that happening right now. Some of us got to be willing to do the consciousness work. Your work is maybe as an organizer, as a poet. You know, you raise the consciousness however you do it. Let's get people to that point, man. You know what I mean? I'm tired. You know what I mean? I'm tired of seeing people suffering. You know, it's unacceptable. You know, and I just think that we should not live in a world where this kind of strife for people. People don't even know what they're gonna do tomorrow, how they're gonna eat tomorrow. You know what I mean? The fact that these big department stores got folks working on Thanksgiving, they don't even care. You know what I'm saying? But who's helping to connect all these dots? You know what I mean? Immigrants to the fast food workers to what's happening in Ferguson, So if we're talking about part of the revolution's got to be that connecting of dots. If you go back and read Huey Newton's work like Revolutionary Suicide, that's what he was talking about. This is where the reading's coming in, because I also think what happens is that we say these things, but we don't realize this stuff has actually been said before. Right. You know what I mean? And the models are out there, so how do we build upon that and take it to the next level? With a 21st century remix. That's what I want to see. Yep. But I'm with it, man. Ride or die, I'm with that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And just how you were saying, like, I talk too much.
But no, you don't talk too much.
No, I always do.
I'm just, let me just, to the brother's point though, my name is Kevin Powell, but I've also been Brother Kajati, I've been Brother Kari al-Islam Muhammad, I've been Brother Kevin X. Do you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Say no more.
And so my point is, you go through different movements, you know what I mean? Which you'll find, some folks stay there, like Rosa, other folks like that. We've been here for a long time, we ain't going nowhere. But a lot of folks talk, 10, 15 years from now, you're like, whatever happened to so-and-so? You know what I'm saying? And so this is a marathon. I just ran the New York City Marathon for the first time, and thank you. That was hard. You know what I'm saying? But it, metaphorically, what it represented, brother, is like I wanted to stop because I got severe leg cramps midway through it. But I was like, this is, I'm running for my ancestors. I'm running for the struggle for the liberation of my people, all people. You feel what I'm saying? And I said, this is what the work I do. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. You know what I mean? And so I'm not going to stand here and tell you everything I know how to do in terms of revolutionary warfare, but you better believe if I came from where I just came, what I just said I came from, you better believe this is part of what I know. You know what I'm saying? But I'm not just going to do this with anybody. You got to be someone who knows what you're doing. You feel what I'm saying? You with me? Yeah. So thank y'all. Appreciate y'all.
I just want to, you said don't just give a speech, we got to give people a charge.
Okay.
Right? So we've been talking about this stuff, right? You have a charge now to move from wherever you are. You all, Brother Kevin said we should vision the world we want to see. You have a charge to do your work to create that, right? Yeah. So whether it's being a poet, whether it's being a scholar, whether it's being out in the streets when the verdict comes down, whether it's working with Carlos Montes' campaign, whatever it is, you can't pretend to be asleep anymore, right?